G'day and welcome to another edition of the Aussie Ideas Man. This time I have a very serious issue to warn everyone of, or at least those who value their licence. I will run through what happened to me here in the state of Queensland as a prime example of how easy it is to lose it, but for those overseas this information may also be valuable to you. It all depends on how draconian your local laws are, and for those in other Aussie states you are probably in the same boat as me. I haven't checked, so it would be well worth your time to make checks for the state you reside in. Cutting to the chase, I was deprived of my driver's licence for over 2 months while I battled to get it back. I was lucky to get it back, and had I known the danger beforehand, I would not even have taken the risk. It was all about the medical certificate I have to have renewed each year, which was easy when all it was about was my type 2 diabetes, but became almost impossible when sleep apnea was added to the list. My dire warning is not to get tested by any sleep clinics, or you just might find yourself in the same situation. And it's the sleep clinics that are the main problem. They are nasty, or at least mine was, and I am suspicious they are similar no matter which clinic you choose. Be very careful, at least, if you are thinking of using one, or you could get the treatment I received. One test and you could find yourself either locked into wearing a CPAP machine for the rest of your life when you really don't need to, or you forfeit your licence and may never get it back. The best way to tell you why this is so is to detail everything about my experience, beginning with long before I was tested by a clinic. For at least the past 30 years I have never slept on my back because I would gag. While I noticed this small choke when going to sleep, I would roll onto my side where I never had a problem with breathing. I never snored and I never awoke tired. I was always refreshed and had a normal day after a normal night's sleep. I would roll from side to side during sleeping without ever stopping on my back. It just became intuitive, so for at least 30 years it was a non-issue. Then I had a diagnosis of a torn tendon in my right wrist area, and rolling on it hurt a lot and slowed the healing process. I had a cortisone injection, which didn't work at all, so I asked my doctor if I could try a CPAP machine just for a while. For while I healed, not knowing what they were like, I thought it could be a solution. My doctor arranged a test with a clinic. The important thing to note is that I was not told there was any risk to my licence. Next, a man comes around one night and wires me up to the hilt with a bulky vest that has hard boxes in it and a clip pinching my finger. There were about 6 pads taped to my body that also pulled on the hairs as I moved while asleep. Up to then, my previous 68 years was sleeping in almost nothing, and that bedroom attire was very comfortable. To make matters worse, I had just given my bed to family visitors from overseas, and we reverted to a smaller blow-up air mattress, which was uncomfortable enough. Since I wanted to try the CPAP machine, I thought these things would not hinder sampling one, so I went ahead with it. However, the most important thing to note is that this man said nothing about any risk to my licence by proceeding, and the notion never entered my head. Within days, they sent the test results to my doctor, which said I was rated moderate for apnea, and that I could sample a machine. I had to attend the clinic to stay a night, and it was then and there they showed a video to me that first said my licence could be in jeopardy. It was too late because testing was already done, but I didn't think I was in danger, since I had driven for about 30 years with this apnea without effect. The important thing to note is that nobody asked me anything about how I managed my long-term apnea, or even that it had existed for decades, not even asking about my reasons for trying out a machine. Neither had the man who strung me up, along with my doctor, who at least knew my motive. Nobody had. It must have been unimportant. Well, the night I was wired up was a bad night's sleep, nothing like I was used to, but the night on the CPAP machine was far worse. I must have had about 20 minutes when I was exhausted just before daylight. I was claustrophobic with being hooked up to a bedside table by the face, and the noise of the machine shattered my usual peace. But worse was the blowing air into my mouth. I tried 3 masks and none made any difference. All kept me awake, and I determined I would endure the pain of my wrist and just try to stay on my left side until it recovered. When I got home, I immediately slept for 4 hours. They wanted me to buy a machine, and I said no. I was done with the trial. At this stage, all the communication was, will I buy one? Next thing to happen was my renewal for the medical certificate arrived in the mail, and I took it to my doctor to sign. He showed me a letter from the clinic that said since I was not managing my apnea, they regarded me as potentially unsafe on the roads. My doctor told me I had to buy a CPAP machine. He refused to even assess me, as the procedure requires. When I complained, and at this stage I had not investigated the matter. He said he would get legal advice, picked up the phone to his secretary, and she came into the room. He showed her the letter and asked her what he should do. She told him not to assess me. Well, I nearly fell over and told him that I was never coming back. Any doctor who gets legal advice from his secretary is no place to be for me. So I go to another doctor's clinic that has at least a dozen doctors working there, and I tell the first one I see what had happened. He reads the actual letter on his computer and tells me that no doctor in Queensland will ever assess me because of the letter, as he himself refused. Now, I had an extended family gathering the very next Saturday, and I mentioned it to a cousin. What he told me was frightening. He said that he had apnea and had to wear his CPAP machine every night, couldn't get out of it, because he had to spend $350 every year for a sleep specialist to read the machine's data and give the approval for a doctor to assess him. If he was lax in wearing it, the specialist would refuse to send that approval. It would take months of compliance to get it back. Up till I'd heard that, I thought I had the easy option of buying a second-hand machine and just sticking it in storage. But this was Big Brother interfering too much, and I had to find some other way of getting assessed. My cousin had a brother-in-law there who happened to be a policeman, who then told me that a police woman lobbied to get these laws about medical certificates because an epileptic driver had killed her child or children in a head-on accident. Now, I'm all for road safety, but an epilept and a snorer were worlds apart to me. So it prompted me to research what doctors were required to do when they were faced with signing certificates, particularly when it comes to apnea. It turns out they have a manual for it, and I could read it on my PC. It's called Assessing Fitness to Drive for Commercial and Private Vehicle Drivers, 2022 edition, Medical Standards for Licensing and Clinical Management Guidelines. And anybody can download the PDF. So I did. While there were many places that supported me being assessed, the most telling part was on page 185 headed Medical Standards and says a person is not fit to hold an unconditional license and lists 4 dot points. The first being if the person has an established sleep apnea syndrome, sleep apnea on a diagnostic sleep study, and moderate to severe excessive daytime sleepiness. If you know the law as well as that secretary, the and requires both to be present, or else the dot point, ergo the requirement, is not met. My night test only established one half of the requirement, and the second half was untrue. Furthermore, it was unknown because the study never went into daytime effects on me. I wrote to the clinic and told them I had not had that second condition in 30 years of having the first, and explained all about my reasons for not needing a machine. Then requested they write to doctors, rescinding their letter, unwarranted and unprofessional opinion about my driving. Many letters later, they continued to hold the standpoint they would never rescind the letter. They first claimed that they had a right to express their opinion because it was to their knowledge, notwithstanding they knew nothing more than I wouldn't buy a machine from them. The second claim was that doctors still could assess me in spite of the letter. I will say more about that later. Finally, about 4 more correspondences were just plain ignored. Finishing off the dot points, each contained an or, so any one could deny a person his certificate to drive. The next was, or if the person has frequent self-reported episodes of sleepiness or drowsiness while driving. Well, I had never reported this in my life, so I passed there. The next was even easier, or if the person has had motor vehicle crashes caused by inattention or sleepiness. In 50 years of driving, I had not crashed for those reasons. No problem. Finally, there is this. Or if the person, in the opinion of the treating doctor, represents a significant driving risk as a result of a sleep disorder. Up until the clinic wrote the letter, no doctor was aware of anything that would make them think that, and because there was nothing, the letter was not written by my treating doctor, but by some cowboys who were leveraging doctors to get a sale for them. It was started by deceit, and it was being enforced by pretending they knew things about me. They were wrong, and the scared doctors should have known better than to be hoodwinked by their tactic. It was clear that I passed the Austrade requirements, only I was trapped into this situation that no doctor would even assess me by the existence of that letter that seemed to travel online anywhere I would visit a doctor. So I went back to the same place and a different doctor saw me. This time I had printed the above dot points from their manual. When he said he wouldn't assess me, I said I had read the manual and he could legally assess and pass me. since other places affirmed that was possible, and that specific place would ensure the sleep study result would pass me in spite of the opinion of the clinic. I tried to hand him the page and I said I had brought every correspondence for him to read should he require it, and was ready to answer every question, but it was to no avail. He didn't even look at the paper with the dot points on it, and for the third time I was blown away with what doctors had told me while refusing to assess. This one was even sillier than the others. He said, "I'm not a lawyer," and just saw me out of the visit. How bad is that? A doctor who won't read 4 dot points from his official manual for doctors because he is not a lawyer. That's worse than thinking your secretary is. By now I went away thinking that the second doctor might be right about no doctor in Queensland assessing me. I could see how scared they all were, and I started thinking I may have to live in New Zealand and get an international licence, then see if a state other than Queensland would transfer that without needing to know about this sleep study's opinion letter. I could see a lot of research and personal disruption as possibly the only way to get a licence, and this while mine had 2 years left on it and I could be booked if I got behind the wheel. I must point out that all the while I was trying to get doctors to assess me, I was making the Transport Department aware of my predicament. That led to many hours of communicating with them and other government departments in a wild goose chase that amounted to nothing. The futility of that path is too long-winded to include here, but I may yet make another video to make anyone thinking about wasting the time with such efforts before they decide to. It turns out that all the departments, especially the one that makes the laws, are totally inept. This, in short, created a situation that permits damaging opinions from sleep study centres to ruin people with no avenue for recourse by them. It's not only me, but any person who has the same predicament. It is as if they condone blackmail by default, and that thought is still strong in my mind, but I will set it aside for now. Just note that it enhanced my frustration for the 2 months of disruption I had gone through, and nobody in their right mind would replicate my efforts. So I decided I would try again at this same doctor's clinic, but this time lead with showing the email from the study clinic that said doctors could still assess me in spite of their opinion. I pretty much knew that no doctors were also lawyers and figured out they could still be stupid, but avenues were so limited it was really all I had. P.S. I won't ever see that third doctor if he ever is in. Fortunately, I got a different doctor, and the line in the email I showed him was highlighted and he read it. I quickly explained my predicament and put another small paper in his hands that I had prepared. It briefly listed the reasons why I can drive safely, and then had one item in a reason why I can't get assessed, and that was I am being blackmailed. I consider the leverage they were holding over doctors thus to tell me a machine form of blackmail, so I wrote it down. Fortunately, this doctor gave it some thought and didn't see me out the door without offering a possible solution, as the prior two had done, nor say that I had to get a machine like the first had said. He said, "I think you should try visiting a sleep specialist," and I thought by now I'm so desperate I will. Now he didn't assess me in spite of reading the line that said he was allowed to, so that scare factor remained. Therefore, the truth that no doctor would assess me was made even more certain. But this offer was at least something, and I was curious to know what would come of it, so I thanked him and he referred me to a specialist. I didn't even try to argue the point that he could assess me without me having to pay $350, and in hindsight I'm glad I left on good terms. I was running out of doctors fast, and they seemed like people you couldn't reason with, so I wasn't about to waste my breath. I took my wife with me to the specialist, since I thought she could back me up on matters like never snoring and never getting drowsy on long drives, stuff like that, and more. But it turned out that the specialist was so professional I would have passed without her support. He was excellent and knew exactly how to handle the situation. I could tell almost immediately that he knew the contents of the Australia's manual and what it all meant. He said first up, there are certain requirements and I had to answer them to see if I could begin to qualify. After answering them, and I recognised them from my reading of the manual, he said I had passed that stage. So now I had to produce the sleep study test and he would evaluate it. What surprised me was that he came from behind his desk and explained what every line on the study meant and how seriously it impacted his decisions. Line by line, I got the full picture of that horrible night that changed everything. None of the 4 doctors had even looked at the test result while in my presence, let alone explain parts of them to me. It turned out that the report itself was enough to not consider me a driving risk. He did say the moderate condition was correct, but the lines had signs that this moderate had no impact on daytime driving ability. And I got clear explanations as to why. I was elated because that meant that the study clinic had no right to say, to my knowledge. The results themselves didn't contain that knowledge. The real expert had shown me why, and it was thoroughly professional. It was also obvious the person speaking to me was highly intelligent, and there was no calling a secretary in for legal advice, and no denying being a lawyer. Nonsense. The next part was like all my Christmases had come at once. He said he would write to the doctor that I was safe to drive and that he would tell him that I should never get this apnea on my certificates list of conditions again. What a bonus. In addition, he alluded to the fact that his profession did not sell people CPAP machines, and so were only interested in the facts. I said I was relieved to hear they were not in bed with the clinics, and he immediately saw the pun that I had not even realised I was making, and said that was something he would remember to use. He was super sharp, and I was duly impressed. Well, my next visit was to the same doctor because that was the procedure when a specialist result was received. No random call-in this time. He read the letter first, then asked me about my long-term type 2 diabetes, which my condition hadn't changed in years and was never a problem. Then he did an eye test and asked me if there was anything else about my health that he should know about. After telling him there was nothing, he signed the form and congratulated me for passing the assessment. It was quick and easy, finally, after more than 2 months of anguish. After 6 visits on the public purse and one at my expense over the public's 7th contribution, plus nearly 6 hours of waiting room time, for which my wife had to endure mostly in the car reading, I had finally got my licence back. That's roughly $1,000 wasted. Had my apnea result been different, I may have had to buy that infernal CPAP machine and suffer the consequences of the laws that make you use it. But a specialist who knew his craft saw it for what it really was. If you use these study centres, you will run the risk of losing your licence. And that is why I tell my story. If my study centre was properly professional, it would not have happened. But it's so much appears like they are crooks who just want to sell machines. I am not even confident that the results they put my name to were really mine, but something they might pull out from a bottom drawer. Such was their childish and stubborn behaviour overall. At least now you know that your licence is at risk just by being tested, and that is one better than my experience. If sleep specialists don't sell machines and are not influenced by that when they assess anyone, you can trust they will stick to the facts and that is right for you no matter what the prognosis. And they have more solutions than just resorting to these machines, which are not the only way to manage apnea. His hinting at being aware of what was going on makes me inclined to think that there are many victims and I would be far from the first. It is better to just go straight to these specialists if you have concerns, because you may avoid a trap that is difficult to escape. I have also since learned that you can access the public hospitals to do your tests, and they don't sell CPAP machines. There are ways to get all the help you need without the risk of blackmail. Before I finish, I would like to know in the comments from anyone who has been through similar hoops to what I have had to jump through, and thoughts from anyone as to should this be corrected in the legislation. Is there anyone out there who knows ways of changing banal legislation to intelligence laws? That is not something I'm equipped to do. I would personally like to see study centres disappear, and especially see legislation that doesn't permit the system to be abused. In a time when they are considering allowing medical cannabis users to drive, I think they should reconsider the whole framework around apnea. In fact, I don't make that video about how useless the government has proven itself to be. I'll at least follow up this video on a comparison of drowsiness in people with apnea and people who get tired for many other reasons. I believe most of those reasons are every bit similar when it comes to driving risk, and many apnea special cases discriminating against people who don't deserve it. There is an element of creating an industry for the sake of money rather than safety in it. In fact, road safety is used as an excuse to hide the greed behind it. If someone complains, they are accused of not regarding the safety factor. It's hogwash. If I had epilepsy, narcolepsy, or other conditions that cause driving risk, I would not want to drive. But those and just getting tired once in a while are worlds apart. Warning is clear. Stay away from sleep clinics. You don't need the hassles. Go to a sleep specialist instead.